Welcome, everybody, to this celebration. Notice the emphasis on celebration of the remarkable life of Dr. Debbie Erdman. And before we get into it very far, I want to thank Dr. Ted Schofield and his crew of friends and colleagues for organizing this event and doing all the work to bring this together. So today marks the end of a streak for me.
Can you turn the volume up?
Turn the volume up, or I'll get closer. Does that help? So today I did something that I'd only do for Debbie Erdman. I broke a string of 5,110 consecutive days of not wearing a necktie. The new streak will begin tomorrow. First, on behalf of Livingston Healthcare, its staff, board of directors, and the Livingston Healthcare Foundation, I want to recognize the important and remarkable contributions that Dr. Debbie Erdman made to medicine and healthcare in our community. Second, a few of you know that I'm a fan of Stoic philosophers, and I want to read something written by a smart fellow about 2,000 years ago, Seneca. Seneca wrote, "It's not at all that we have too short a time to live, but that we squander a great deal of it. Life is long enough, and it's given in sufficient measure to do many great things if we spend it well." We're all here to celebrate the fact that Debbie Erdman spent it well. She squandered not one moment. Through her example, she has set the bar very high for all of us. We all have to honor Debbie's life by living the way Debbie lived, with energy, optimism, generosity, compassion, and love for all people. I look out and I see so many lucky people who had the honor and the privilege to know Debbie Erdman for 20, 30 years. I regret, though I value every moment of it, that I only knew Debbie for a dozen years. I'll carry that regret with me forever. She made an impact on my life and every life around me through her example, her optimism, her desire to help. That's what we're here today to celebrate and to carry forward in her honor. Now I want to introduce Dr. Sean Burwell, who joined Dr. Erdman's OB/GYN practice in Livingston, and they served the community as medical partners until Dr. Erdman retired in 1999, and they remained lifelong friends thereafter. Doctor?
Am I speaking loud enough?
So Debbie had a way of bringing people together in almost everything she did, and I see that she's done it again today. I'm not accustomed to public speaking, but on this particular occasion, I would like to share a little bit of history and then a short vignette about Dr. Erdman. So, why did Debbie Erdman come to Livingston? She grew up in Wisconsin. After finishing medical school, she decided to specialize in obstetrics and gynecology. She was accepted to the OB/GYN residency at Vanderbilt University in Nashville. This is where I first met Debbie. She was in her third year of residency when I was starting my first year. So she became one of my mentors, and she was a very enthusiastic mentor. More importantly, Debbie met Andreas Luder, her future husband, at Vanderbilt. He was completing his PhD in molecular biology. As they both were entering their final year at Vanderbilt, they discussed together where they would like to live and work. They agreed on 2 criteria for choosing a location. It had to be a location with tall mountains and real snow. And that's quoting Andreas if he's here. Debbie put an ad in the job listings for physicians, and a small group of physicians at the Park Clinic in Livingston, Montana responded to her ad. When Debbie and Andreas came to Livingston to interview, she found that the physicians at the Park Clinic were very welcoming. During that visit, Debbie and Andreas took the time to winter camp at Cook City. That night it snowed very heavily, and so their 2 criteria were satisfied: tall mountains and real snow. So Debbie accepted the position at the Park Clinic, and Andreas accepted a position at MSU in the Department of Plant Pathology. They married and they moved west. Debbie became the first OB/GYN physician ever in Livingston. She was undaunted by this challenge. Her practice grew to the point where she was delivering 100 babies or more per year. Patients came to see her from neighboring towns, Bozeman, Big Timber, Harlowton, Mammoth, and even beyond. She was dedicated to her patients, and this required being available at all times, days, nights, and weekends. And keep in mind that 50% of obstetrics occurs at night. I am amazed that she was able to maintain a busy solo OB/GYN practice for 8 years, but she did. In 1991, she recruited me to join her OB/GYN practice. So that's the history of Debbie coming to Livingston. And now I have a short vignette. It was hard to pick one single vignette out of so many. But this one I call Debbie's Office. What was it like practicing with Dr. Debbie Erdman? One of my first impressions came when she showed me her office at the Park Clinic. Her office was about 15 feet from the banks of the Yellowstone River. There were 2 large picture windows in her office, one facing south and one facing east. The view was spectacular. But what puzzled me about her office was a large white sectional couch, which took up about 30% of her office space. My puzzlement over the couch was soon resolved. Colleagues were stopping by our shared office. Now, these are memories here. I remember Dr. Bray, our general surgeon, coming to sit down on the comfy couch. He would kind of wink with one eye and then make a quiet comment about the weather. It was like he was taking a breather before going back to his own busy schedule. On other days, Dr. LeBlond, one of our internists, would come to the office with the comfy couch and make a wise or astute pronouncement about the state of the world or politics, and then wait to see our response. And so the office which I shared with Debbie was part haven and part gathering place. But I also think that colleagues were stopping by to absorb some of Debbie's positive energy and enthusiasm. And so the months went by. Debbie and I were different in character. She was exuberant and expressive. I was quiet and calm. But we meshed and we worked well together. There was never an argument. We both wanted to provide the best possible care for our patients, and we respected each other. The years flew by, and one day in 1999, she came to me and she said in a serious tone, "Sean, I'm going to retire." I was shocked and sad, but I knew it was the best decision for her. Her health was challenged by an autoimmune illness called Wegener's granulomatosis. She needed more rest and less stress. As you will hear from other speakers today, Debbie turned her energy to new endeavors to benefit the Livingston community. Thank you, and now I would like to introduce our next speaker, David Standley, a longtime friend of Debbie's. I have to leave the introduction thing for you. Yeah. So you'll introduce this person there.
Got it. Thank you, Dr. Burwell. Jean and I were friends of Debbie and Andreas for many years. I never knew Debbie as a physician. She retired from her practice about the same time that Jean and I came to Montana 25 years ago. And I was never part of her hiking program. I'm 15 years older than Debbie was, and I viewed her morning hikes as if a forced march. Right. But for more than a decade, I knew Debbie best as a philanthropist and as a leader in thought and deed in our community. Very little that should have been done in the nonprofit sector of Park County and Livingston was done without her support and usually her leadership. About a decade ago, Debbie and I were appointed co-chairs of the campaign to raise the community share of the roughly $40 million needed to build our magnificent new hospital. Debbie had never done this kind of fundraising before. She had a full understanding of philanthropy, but she was not a fundraiser. And she agreed to be the co-chair on one condition, and that was that she would never ask other people for money. Never. Never have, never will, no way. Her reluctance lasted for about 15 minutes into her first presentation of the campaign. I watched and listened with astonishment and pride and some amusement as she, shortly into her first presentation to a family of very substantial wealth in Shields Valley, when she asked people she hardly knew, straight up, for $500,000. Essentially amazing. The next morning, we received their commitment for $500,000. She, who said she would never ask for money, did so again and again during our 3-year campaign. Debbie's energy and commitment were unflagging for that campaign and indeed for the community at large. She made an enormous difference. Debbie was a purpose-driven person. Her commitment to the health and well-being of our community was broad and it was deep. Debbie lived her values, first among them her generosity. I will always value Debbie's friendship. We will value her memory. Her footsteps will echo in these mountains and her legacy within this community. And now, a video of Joan Huey and Peggy Scanson and Peggy O'Neill live and in person.
In the early 1980s, I worked occasionally on night shift on obstetrics. And it was very exciting to have a new obstetrician move to town. My introduction to Dr. Erdman, and hers to me, happened dramatically in the middle of the night. I had admitted a young patient in early labor, first baby, right around midnight, and thought, great, she'll deliver probably sometime today, and I'll keep her comfortable during the night. We'll watch what happens. About an hour later, her mother rushed out of the labor room and said, "Nurse, nurse, the baby's coming. I can see the feet." Whoa. Immediately, we called the attending physician and he said, "Get Dr. Erdman." It seemed like an eternity, but I believe it was within 5 to 7 minutes that both doctors were in the hospital. We had the patient in the delivery room, instrumentation ready, and it didn't take them long before they delivered a perfectly healthy young baby boy, footling breech. What an introduction. I don't know what Dr. Erdman might have said to other people about that young, inexperienced nurse who did not pick up on a breech presentation, but to me, she was kind, encouraging. She taught me what I might have looked for or done differently. She was never critical or judgmental. When she bought her house in Deep Creek, I said, "But Dr. Debbie, you might not make it for a delivery." And she said, "You're right. I'll help you know what to do." And she did. She had me gown and glove, stand right next to her during several deliveries, and just explained everything to me. And I was very grateful for that, especially during the 4 deliveries that the doctors didn't make it during my years on obstetrics. I do hope that she knew how much I appreciated her and her kindness, her instruction, and her confidence in me. Passionate, intense in everything she did. The operating room staff will not forget doors crashing open and Dr. Debbie rushing in, whether a surgery was in progress or not, saying, "I need an operating room. Joan, where are you? I need an operating room." She may or may not have put a cover gown on. Hat would be askew on her head, a mask maybe or maybe not on. But she was passionate. intense. Sometimes it was truly an emergency. Sometimes it was just Dr. Debbie being, well, Dr. Debbie, and we would reassure her that, yes, we'd be ready if and when she needed an operating room. In the middle of the night, if we were called in for a C-section and it was Dr. Erdman on call, we could be sure that by the time we arrived in the hospital, the bed would be flying down the hall with the patient in it, piloted by Dr. Debbie, on its way to the operating room. Mother and baby were her first concern. The staff worked right alongside of her to make sure that the baby was delivered safely, but there were times when we had some catching up to do to match her speed. Even in intense situations, I don't remember Debbie being angry or insulting. She was kind, considerate, professional, engaging, generous, and more than once, we had to tuck her pearls inside her scrub gown because she'd forgotten to take them off when she changed. We had a protocol in place for an emergency C-section that when there was no anesthesia available, and I was there the midnight hour that Dr. Debbie put that into practice. The call staff was already busy with the surgery, and a second anesthetist was at least 15 or 20 minutes away. Somehow we were able to staff a second operating room with nurses. The baby was delivered using the protocol safely before anesthesia arrived, and the surgery completed after they were there. Healthy mother and baby. Frazzled staff, yes. Healthy mother and baby. A patient of hers, scheduled for a cesarean birth, let her know that the stars would be aligned at a certain time and date for the optimal success of her baby in life. Unfortunately, the time was 5:15 in the morning, which meant, of course, having anesthesia, additional physicians, nursing staff, all there early and on overtime hours. Dr. Debbie worked with administration and staff for approval for this procedure and delivered that baby in the prescribed window of time. She was willing to go the extra mile for her patient. We may have grumbled a bit. In fact, we probably did. But in retrospect, I could see the level of care that she had for her patients and her willingness to accommodate them. She cared deeply for staff who worked with her also. She never forgot my name, and in later years when I saw her in the hospital, always had a smile and a gracious word for me. She was skilled, competent, never critical, and had a smile for everyone, a smile that brightened her face, yet and let you know that she truly cared. Dr. Erdman was a beautiful, amazing person, and I am blessed to have known and worked with her.
Hey, hi there. My name's Peggy Scanson. I was asked to give a talk today for the tribute and the honor of Dr. Erdman. I thought it would be easy. I've known her for a very long time, but to catch the real essence of Dr. Erdman was very difficult for me. And you that know her probably know exactly what I'm talking about. I was her nurse, had been working on the OB floor, and I heard that there's going to be a new female OBGYN coming to Livingston. Lucky enough to get the job. Kind of funny story, the first time I met her, I thought she was a patient. I actually took her back to the patient room, and it wasn't until at that time she introduced herself as my boss. Talk about a first impression. But as you know, that's Dr. Erdman. She just kind of took everything in stride. I called her Dr. Erdman, but her patients called her Debbie or Dr. Debbie. And she encouraged that. I would use the word passionate to describe Dr. Erdman. She was passionate with her care of her patients, family, friends, her dog, skiing. She lived life to the fullest. She often, but
Hi, I'm Peggy O'Neill, an RN from Livingston Healthcare, and I actually started working with Debbie. Sorry. My name's Peggy O'Neill. I'm an RN, and I started working at Livingston Memorial Hospital over 45 years ago. I was there when Dr. Debbie came to work. I have some things to say about her, but I was thinking as I was standing there about her enthusiasm, and I thought maybe I'd share this story. I got my hair done on Monday. And then after it was done, I got in the car and looked in the mirror and I said, hey, you have to talk to these people on Saturday. What are you thinking? So it brought back to mind a few years ago, I had gotten my hair done, and it was supposed to be kind of a copper color. It wasn't blue, but it was copper, and when I got done, it was kind of a bright orange. And so I got a little bit of flack at work. In fact, I got counseled. And I think the word had gotten back to Debbie, because a few days later, I was going up the stairs, and she was coming down the stairs from a meeting, and she yelled, "Darling, I love your hair!" And everybody in the, I call it the grand ballroom, the registration, was looking up, and I was going, okay, thank you for calling that to everyone's attention. But it was her way of kind of giving me a little support because she knew I was in a little bit of trouble. So, anyway, we were very excited and nervous when we heard that we had a woman doctor joining the staff at Park Clinic and Livingston Memorial Hospital. She was an OB doctor, which none of us had ever worked with, and she was female. And we had always worked with male doctors, and so she was the first female doctor, too, that ever came into the hospital. She charged in with enthusiasm and compassion that we had never seen. Her patients loved her, and the staff felt a closeness that we had never known with other providers on staff. She was so full of life, and she was so full of life, and she loved new life. She advocated for patients and staff. We started seeing patients from all over the state. We had patients coming from Great Falls, Bozeman. And remember, this was at a time where probably half of the pregnant women in this community were going to Bozeman for better care. But we had these other people from the state because they wanted to be delivered by a woman doctor. The Hutterites up around White Sulphur, the colonies up there, they started bringing the women into Livingston to deliver babies with a woman doctor, and she was extremely popular. So I think Sean said 100 deliveries a year. I would almost think it was more than that, but she didn't deliver them all. So we saw a lot of people from around the state. She was always full of energy and just was dearly loved by us all. I would be remiss if I didn't mention the Whippets. And I'm so glad Bill Hunter's here today because I want to share this. Many times you would find the OB nurses sitting at the desk hiding the Whippets under their feet while Debbie was rounding. And then if the nurse was busy and couldn't hide the Whippets, she would take them to the radiology department. I cherish the time I spent with Debbie. She was not just a wonderful coworker, but she was a very dear friend. And I'm honored to share this with you today. And our next speaker is Heidi Barrett. She's a former patient and a longtime friend of Debbie's.
Okay, I'm a little nervous. 29 years ago, I was pregnant with my first child. My husband Jim and I were living in our cabin just outside of Silvergate at the northeast entrance of Yellowstone National Park. I was thrilled to learn that there were not one, but 3 OBGYN doctors in Livingston: Sean Burwell, Julie Danaher, and Debbie Erdman. When I would go in for my monthly checkups, I would see whoever was at the clinic. I understood that when I went into labor, I would have one of those doctors overseeing the birth. On June 1st of that year, I went into labor at 4 o'clock in the morning. We hopped in our car and began the 2.5-hour drive to the hospital in Livingston. And I know what everyone is thinking, but believe me, we had plenty of time. I soon learned Dr. Erdman would be the doctor delivering my baby. I was in labor for another 16 hours when Dr. Erdman concluded I was not dilating and the baby was becoming distressed. It was also observed there was meconium in the water. I would need an emergency C-section. I immediately protested, not because I was afraid of surgery, but rather I was afraid of the hospital's credit manager at the time. She had already put the fear of God into me when not 6 weeks before my husband had to have an emergency appendectomy. We did not have any health insurance, and she was demanding to know how we would pay. So how in the world could I possibly afford another surgery? Debbie assured me, as she was peeling my fingers from the door jamb, that she would intervene for me and to not worry. After my C-section and the delivery of an absolutely perfect baby boy, Debbie came in to see me and my baby. She was grinning from ear to ear and said excitedly, the incision she made was one of the best ever, and would I mind if she took a few photos? She pulled out her camera and took a few shots, glad to have them as part of her resume. I returned home after 6 weeks and went in to see Debbie for my and the baby's checkup. She asked how everything was going. I said overall really well, but that I was having recurring nightmares where I would misplace or lose my baby. I told her one dream was that I was pitching hay to the cows. Having grown up on a farm, this was not unusual. I had laid my baby down on a haystack, and when I was done, he was nowhere to be found. The other dream was that I was in church and everyone got up to take communion, including me. Also not unusual, I was raised Lutheran. I set the baby down on the pew, and when I returned, he was gone. Obviously, these nightmares were upsetting to me, so I was looking at Debbie with consternation. She looked me in the eye earnestly and said, "Oh, I know exactly how you feel. I have dreams just like that about losing my purse." We sat for a moment looking at one another, and then we burst out laughing at the analogy. I immediately felt better, and I stopped having those nightmares after that. And true to her word, Debbie didn't intervene with the credit manager, and we were able to set up reasonable payments. I think my son was like 5 years old when I finally paid him off and he belonged to me. I stayed in touch with Debbie and often updated her on what my son was up to and shared photos with her. We moved to Livingston in 1998, and I often crossed paths with Debbie at events or in conjunction with nonprofits that we both supported. I'm now the executive director at Aspen, and Debbie was a wonderful donor and helped Aspen with acquiring its new safe house in 2021 by making a lead gift. I miss Debbie's infectious smile, her good sense of humor, and her positive attitude. I'm grateful to have known Debbie, and every time I look into my son's face, I'm grateful for her skill as a doctor. Thank you. Sorry. Okay. I'm now introducing Erica Adams. She's the executive director at the Shane Lalani Center for the Arts.
I was asked to say just a few brief words about Debbie and her philanthropy. Debbie has left a legacy of love, respect, and generosity. And she is a big part of why our organization is where we are today. One specific example is she helped us create a space for our community to connect, like we are this afternoon, gathered in the Deborah Erdman Ballroom. Her legacy, however, far pushes past these walls and is truly unquantifiable. Her generosity and support have impacted thousands of participants, community members who have come to an event or enjoyed a performance here, and then also with all of the folks who have attended our galas and that were always adorned by her beautiful flowers. as well as countless other nonprofits she was passionate about and supported. Debbie's legacy of altruism will continue to impact the lives of future generations. Her kindness ripples out through the work we all do into the community and is an inspiration. On behalf of the Shane Lonnie Center for the Arts, her board of directors, and our community, I'd like to say thank you, Debbie. We are forever indebted with gratitude. Now, I've been asked to introduce Dawn Gimbel, a longtime friend and also a board member. Thank you.
I'm the other guy that wore a tie today. I just want to say a couple of words about my friend Debbie. Oh, can't hear me, huh? Jeez, some of you are lucky. Those of you who have known me to go on and on and on, I'm not going to do that today. Thank you. Debbie, as everybody that has spoken before me and will follow me has said, she was a very special lady, very special person, very special member of the community, somebody who we all, I would suspect, everybody in this room knew to some degree or another. And I would just like to tell you that she spent a lot of time in my living room and at my dining table, along with Andreas. And we differed on political persuasions, but we got along really well. She was kind, giving, gave new meaning to philanthropy. And I encourage you all to think about Deb and what she did for this community and for people in general. And I want to thank you all for coming today and paying tribute to this wonderful lady. Thank you. Now it's Corky's turn. Corky Britton will now have a couple of words to say. Thanks, Corky.
I'm very glad to have been asked to speak today about our wonderful and unique friend, Debbie Erdman. It's an honor for me. I want to say something about the work of the Livingston Hospital Ethics Committee in the 1990s, in part to draw attention to still another dimension of her personality and of the difference she made in our Livingston and Park County community, in part to make clear that the committee played a little noticed but significant role in advancing some basic hospital policies. At least in my view, the ethics committee here that she chaired and others springing up across the country at the same time were in large part the result of nurses' concerns. Two of them were particularly important. One was that many patients didn't understand the diagnosis that they were given or the treatment they were to receive. Nurses told the committee that often when the doctor had finished telling the patient what was wrong with him or her, what should be done about it, and then left the room, the patient turned to the nurse and asked, "What did he say?" Understandably, the nurses didn't want to answer the question. The other concern was the felt need for more palliative care at the end of life. Nurses, who normally spent more time at the patient's bedsides than doctors, wanted to help relieve pain and were not always able as a matter of policy to do so. The growing hospice movement made a big difference for many people. The director of hospice was always a member of the committee, but nurses wanted more in-pain relief, more in-hospital pain relief. Many local doctors, among them Tom Danaher, Yoshito, Dennis Noteboom, Ted Schofield, and Doug Wadley, and a hospital administrator, Sam Plesher, were very supportive of the committee's efforts to take these concerns seriously. But some others did not like the idea of a committee, not all of whose members were medical professionals, sitting in judgment, so to speak, on the decisions they were uniquely qualified to make, especially since ethical questions were often so amorphous and couldn't be addressed in a rigorous way. They also maintained, understandably, that they were pledged primarily to save lives, not minimize pain in those cases where the two aims might be in conflict. Those of us in the Ethics Committee understood this and had neither the skill nor the desire to sit in judgment on anyone's healthcare decisions. But we felt that the nurses' concerns needed to be discussed in an open and informed way by the entire healthcare community, especially since new questions were being raised by the dramatic increase in life-extending medicines and technologies. Almost all of our discussions centered on end-of-life issues that previous generations simply hadn't had to face. Debbie was chair of the Ethics Committee. Simply put, without her leadership, we would have made little progress in our own discussions of principles and helping focus hospital policies on nursing concerns and patients' larger needs. It's just that simple. It's neither possible nor necessary to go into detail today, but two elements in her leadership were important. They have to do with the kind of person that Debbie was. First, she read everything she could lay her hands on in the medical ethics literature. She referred to specific books and articles in our monthly committee meetings. She suggested in a firm but friendly voice that we should all be familiar with at least some of it. Characteristically, she was worried that she didn't have a grip on the traditional Western ethical theories that informed this literature, and so one semester she audited my ethics course at MSU, driving over 4 times a week, often staying after class to ask me tough questions. Many people are naturally curious. It's a wonderful trait. But Debbie was more than curious. She wanted to get to the bottom of things. I don't know how she engaged with others. With me, there was little small talk. And so it was no surprise that after her retirement, she pursued a certificate in medical ethics from the University of Washington, never satisfied with what she knew, always wanting to dig deeper. Second, Debbie wanted action on the issues. Occasionally there was some pushback from a hospital administrator, as when the nurses on our committee wanted to replace a hospital exit questionnaire that asked such things as whether the meals had arrived hot with whether the diagnosis that had been adequately explained and all questions that the patients had been answered. She didn't always get her way, but she kept pushing hard for nurse-originated, patient-centered care. Although she was a good listener and never hostile or dismissive, on most, certainly not all issues, she remained to be convinced. If you thought a particular belief of hers was wrong, you had to provide an argument to prove it. Rightly, she had a great deal of confidence in her own judgment, perhaps in part the legacy of having 2 extraordinarily gifted parents. Incidentally, although there is not now, in addition to home health care and hospice, a palliative care program at the hospital, perhaps owing to staffing issues, the exit questionnaire, now in place, addresses, as does the Livingston Healthcare Statement of Patient Rights and Responsibilities, just the sorts of concerns that our committee had. It was her overriding interest in the moral dimensions of our common life that led her to take up the chairmanship of the Hospital Ethics Committee. It was this same overriding interest that motivated her abundant philanthropy. For Debbie, it was always a question of how things could be improved, made better. In the case of her great gift to Livingston Healthcare, by way of the rehabilitation of the physical abilities of many people, Vanessa and I among them. I loved talking with her, watching her in action, catching her delight in ideas, the out of doors, and other people, and hope I carried away something in the process. And I hope all of us who knew her well do so also. Thank you. Now, I want to introduce Lee Watson. And I'm going to say that 40 years ago, he was a student of mine. And I say that not to take credit for what he's about to read you, but to indicate that for people my age, a consoling thought is that I'm a member of, it's a time in my life, I should say, of generational change. And while my friends and I look back and relive wonderful memories, we also look ahead. And our hope, of course, is that people in the next generation or two take seriously the kind of example that Debbie Erdman set. Thank you.
Hello. So like many of you, I first met Debbie when she delivered our son 26 years ago. And then I got to know her better when she later, as a teen, she and Andreas hired him to come work up at Deep Creek Green. And then even better still, up at our ranch with Walt and Ruth when she'd come up for many dinners and events. But mostly it was up there in Mill Creek when she's cross-country skiing that so inspired me and inspired this poem, which I posted over a year ago, and I'm so glad I did it then and got to share it with her. And it's just a kind of a reminder of those people that we care about, that now is the time to tell them. So it's called Skiing Wicked Creek with Debbie Erdman. Whose woods these are, we all know. Her house is way up Deep Creek, though. We often see her skiing here, as often as the clouds bring snow. As sure as hawks, as sure as deer, so naturally she's skiing here. Above the camp and frozen creek, her laugh is heard this time of year. Like the tracks in the snow she'll make, she impresses on us, it's no mistake, to ski this snow, however deep, and to appreciate each storm, each flake. Lucky are those who have ever skied and followed Debbie Erdman's creed. We thank you for the example you show as you kick and glide across the snow. And then I followed that up. That was really for Debbie. And then this year, after she passed, I had to add to that poem, and these are both posted up there about a quarter of a mile up the trail. And this one's actually for all of you to remember her and to follow her example. Debbie Erdman has now skied on, leaving us here to wander along, to follow the tracks she left so wide, to embrace her spirit that skis by our side, the spirit that asks us to do more, to do good, whether here in the mountains or our own neighborhood. For it's kindness, compassion, it's patience and grace that will guide you along. It's not winning a race. Think about Debbie as you ski up the trail. She will help you feel strong when you're feeling frail. Remember Debbie when life throws you a curve. Stand tall like Debbie. Find strength, find the nerve to plow through that drift, to leave a fine track for your friends to follow, knowing they've got your back. Follow Debbie's example, a strong kick, a smooth glide, knowing she is there beside you as you savor the ride.
Well, it's my job now to draw this celebration to a close, but I'm not going to do that because I want this celebration to go on every day in our hearts and our minds and our actions. Let's continue to lead and live a life of accomplishment and responsibility and love and compassion, the way Debbie set the model for us. And now I will conclude by reminding everybody that there is a sign-in book out front that we'd like everyone to sign and leave comments if you'd like, and also to remind you that in the theater, the slideshow of all the photos is going on. and it's terrific. And then one more thing. Carol Lalani wants to add something.
Promise I'll be short. I am short. Can I say it from here?
You can do it right there, Carol, if you like.
I just had to say how Deborah became part of our lives. So some people came from Havre, some people came from wherever to have their baby. I flew in from Hong Kong. Who does that? Well, it was because my mother was at the hospital, and we obeyed our mother. She was Australian. And so we were working in Hong Kong. I took Citibank travels with B of A, and I'm pretty pregnant at that time. And we were being transferred to London. But I got a call from my mother, Dulcie, if any of you knew her. And she said, Carol, there's the most wonderful doctor here. You're going to have the baby in Livingston. And I said, Mom, I'm like 8 months pregnant. We're being transferred to London. No, you're coming to Livingston. And we obeyed our mother. So she said, she's wonderful, Dr. Erdman. So we arrive about 8 days or 9 days. So I met her September 12th, 1983, when Shane Lalani was born. So go in there, and there's Debbie Erdman, very efficient, I'm nervous. And Mom wasn't supposed to show up that morning, but she did. So my mom was there working Peggy O'Neill, and that's how I met this wonderful lady here, Peggy. And so that's where Shane was born. And that brought our connection again to Livingston, even though I grew up here. So when my mom died, Debbie and Andres did all the flowers. And sadly, when Shane died, she did all the flowers again at the memorial. And then she became Debbie. We were close friends, and Andreas and the dog. And then one day, it was long after, and she was fundraising along with all these people. And she came up and she said to us, if you give X amount of money to the hospital, I will give X amount of money for the Shane Center. And she was very persuasive, but in a kind, nice way. So that happened, that became the Shane Birth Center, and this is the Debbie Erdman ballroom. And then I'd just like to throw in Dr. Ann Wentz and her husband, the two Wentzes, trained Debbie Erdman at Vanderbilt.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you all. Let's go celebrate.